Welcome to the Pastor Podcast with Randy and Andy, where Sunday's sermon sparks Wednesday's conversation. Each week, they sit down to dive deeper, reflect thoughtfully, and wrestle with the themes of this week's message. Their goal is to explore faith more fully, ask the hard questions, and invite you into a dialogue that goes beyond the pulpit.
Welcome into the podcast, everybody. I'm Pastor Randy Moore.
And I'm Pastor Andy Payton.
All right, here we are, sitting down for our weekly visit. It's not the only visit that we have, but it's on the schedule, and we're in comfy chairs,
Right.
and here we go. Yeah, and we've started a new month, which means a new theme.
Yes. The stories that shape us is our month-long sermon theme for September.
All right. Hey, in our soul check-in, I wanted to say thank you for letting me know about the Liturgy of the Hours. I know that you use the Liturgy of the Hours, and I've started using it, and that stuff is good for the soul. And what's really good, I think, is in the morning. I'm pretty religious about my morning time with those. Now the mid-morning and the noon and those others, those are hit and miss. But to start off first thing in the morning, as a news person, I used to always, I'd check the news first thing. You know, I roll out of bed, what's going on in the news, what's happened overnight. Now I start with this. It makes a big difference.
Do you read all of them or just like one of them?
I actually use one where it's audio.
Okay.
And so I can listen.
They read it to you.
They read it to you,
Cool.
and you can read along, and there are responses in there. So this is the one I use is from the Roman Catholic Church. There is one from the Anglican Church. Which one do you use?
I just read it. I mean,
You
I
just
use
read
the
it,
Book
yeah.
of Common Prayer.
Oh, okay.
And so there's an Old Testament Hebrew Bible reading, there's the epistle reading, and then there's a gospel, and there's a psalm too. So it's kind of like the lectionary for every day.
Right.
And then, so I read those.
Yeah.
Typically.
Good. I like it. I like it a lot. I'm going to try to work in some of those later hours through the day. By the time you get your day going, sometimes it's a little bit harder to do that. But
I always I'm going to do it today. I'm going to pray at noon. I'm going to pray, and I'll forget. And then, yeah.
Well, that's good stuff. Okay, let's jump into our text for this first sermon from here in the month of September. We're in Luke. It's the year of Luke in the Revised Common Lectionary, and the lesson came from chapter 14, verses 25 to 33. In my sermon from the previous week, I said that, sometimes Jesus says things that are hard to understand, but I focused on something that was rather clear, and that was invite the poor to dinner. And here's one of the tough ones.
It's real zinger.
Yeah, this is one that does need some explanation. So here we go. Now large crowds were traveling with him, and he turned and said to them, "Whoever comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even life itself, cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry the cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, intending to build a tower, does not first sit down and estimate the cost to see whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish it, all who see it will begin to ridicule him, saying, 'This fellow began to build and was not able to finish.' Or what king going out to wage war against another king will not sit down first and consider whether he is able with 10,000 to oppose the one who comes against him with 20,000? If he cannot, then, while the other is still far away, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. So therefore, none of you can become my disciple if you do not give up all your possessions."
So where do you want to start?
Well, last week, because we did mention that there are difficult sayings and there are clear sayings, and you even answered the question last week, even though I wasn't trying to answer the questions through my sermon, but that a lot of this is hyperbole.
Yeah, I like that first statement, which is a very difficult one if you just take it at, if you look at it literally, just take a look at it literally, it's hard. I mean, Jesus says, "Whoever comes to me but does not hate father, mother, wife, children, brothers, sisters, yes, even life itself, can't be a disciple." That's a pretty challenging statement, but that word hate in the Aramaic that Jesus spoke or would have spoken was it idiom? So they would use that as an idiom for like second place.
Mm-hmm.
So they would use that word hate sometimes in the ancient world. What they meant was like, it's not top of the priority list. It's kind of second on the priority list, which is a little more helpful there, when reading that passage.
Yeah. Also, I think it is accurate in this military context. I think we don't see Jesus as militaristic, but he did use this this military story. I think that when we are faced with a challenge to step up with something that's as important as defending your country, then at that point you do, in a sense, not hate your family, but you do prioritize whatever it is you need to do militarily to protect your country.
Are you ready to do what it takes?
Yes, and that means leaving family sometimes. So, yeah, it's not, and what we're doing is not explaining this away. We absolutely don't want to do that, because if we do that, then it does lose its edge.
Right.
And you want the edge to stay there.
Well, I mean, this passage starts with large crowds were beginning to travel with Jesus. And so he has a fan club. That's kind of the way I talked about it in my sermon. And Jesus, I think, he just kind of wants everyone to get everything in perspective. Like, are you really sure that you have what it takes? I'm not interested in a fan club here. I'm more interested in disciples ready to give their lives for the cause of the kingdom of God. And it's going to be difficult. That's kind of what Jesus is doing. He's trying to shock them into seeing the truth, the reality of the situation.
We're talking about discipleship.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a difference between being a disciple and being a fan.
Yeah. Yeah, there was a book written like that a couple of years ago. When I was writing my sermon, I'm like, I'm not trying to write that book again. But
what's it called? Not a fan?
Not a fan, I think.
Yeah. I read that one too. Okay, the stories that shape us. So this is the theme. And so your opening question, what's your story?
Yeah, I took that from a moment that happened to me years ago. I walked into the hospital room, and I was visiting a family that just had a baby. And so the family, of course, has gathered around, and I awkwardly walk in the room and didn't know everyone. And someone looked at me and said, "So what's your story? Like, what are you doing here?" And that question, that moment, it has always kind of stuck with me. And it's a fair question, because we all have stories that we tell ourselves from the past, about the present, about the future. And we as humanity, really, we tell stories, right? I mean, that's how we make meaning out of our lives. It's not, that we're just a narrative people.
We are.
The fact that we watch movies and read books, and that's where we derive our sense of what life's all about in many ways.
And that's why Jesus told stories.
He constantly told stories, gave parables. He didn't argue with people. If you notice with Jesus, a lot of time he didn't argue. He would have a situation where there's a conflict, and then rather than arguing, he would just tell a story, because it's the stories that ultimately shape us. And so that's kind of the theme for the month. But of course, the challenge is sometimes the stories that we tell ourselves, they collide with the story that the gospel calls us to live into. And this passage, though it's a difficult one, certainly goes in that direction.
Yeah. So this whole discipleship idea, and you press this point more than once, it's not about making it easy. It's just not, because it is costly.
Yeah, I mean, the spirit of what we talked about on Sunday is that discipleship is going to cost us. It's not going to be comfortable. Mm-hmm. And I think there's this sense sometimes where people come to church, I'm certainly guilty of this, where I just want it to be comfortable. I just want it to be easy. Well, that's not Jesus. And if you're going to be honest about what it takes to follow him, you have to kind of understand that, get that story straight, if you will.
Yeah. I like this line. It's not a faith. Our faith is not a faith that we consume like any other consumer product, but it's one that transforms.
Did I say that?
You did say that. Or at least that's a paraphrase.
Yeah. No, it's exactly it, though, right? I mean, it's not a consumer type of Christianity. Our faith, if it's real, it demands a change in our lives, and that's totally Jesus, absolutely.
Yeah, and it begins with realizing that Jesus loves you, and because Jesus loves you, we can do the difficult thing.
Right, and the reason I said that on the front end of my sermon is that when we begin to preach on or teach on these difficult texts, I'm always worried about the tendency where they'll think, well, I'm doing this to earn God's love. I'm doing this to earn God's approval. And that's not the gospel either. The gospel says you have God's love, you have God's approval in a sense, but that love and that approval demands something of us in return as a response. And that's why I said that, because everyone needs to know, number one, that Christ loves us, that God's for us, not against us. And but because of that love, we can face some of the difficult things in our lives and in the world around us.
Yeah, and we've already talked about this a little bit, but I don't think we necessarily need to leave it. We can come back to it, this whole idea of hate. And aren't we all about family values, right?
Right.
So family is important.
Yeah, no, family was clearly important to Christ as well. I mean, obviously he had a good relationship with his mother. Mary was there at his crucifixion. She stayed with him till the very end. And then James, Jesus' brother James, also became a leader in the early church. And so I think just as we look at Christ's life, it's clear that he had a good relationship with his family overall. They were just not, again, they weren't number one on the priority list. They were important, but the number one thing for Christ was to do God's will.
Yeah,
and that's what he's trying to get at here, really.
And even in the church, one of the analogies we use is we think of ourselves as a family, and sometimes in churches we even call each other brothers and sisters, right? So family is important. Community, family, yeah. So it's about priority.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
You know, where's your priority really at? Is it our comfort? Is it our family? Biological family in this sense, and then, or is it to do God's will, to do what God desires of us?
And to take up the cross, that's another area where, if we're not careful, we can water that down too.
Yeah, I mean, in our context today, when folks use that phrase, carry our cross, what we're typically referring to is hardship. But for the first century folks, that was a real possibility. It wasn't like metaphor or symbol. It was like, are you willing to do what it takes? Will you go to the cross? And for the first century context, the cross was a Roman form of execution. It was utilized whenever someone defied Roman authority. And so I think what Jesus is saying here really is that our discipleship at times will demand that we serve God's kingdom, even if it means we go against in Jesus' case, the Roman kingdom or other kingdoms even to this day.
And for many of Jesus' first followers, it literally led to the cross.
Yeah, most of them were martyred.
Yeah,
most of them were crucified.
Yeah,
and that tells us that their vision, their understanding of what God wanted for this world was different than the vision of their world, the Roman vision of their world, and ultimately that led to their violent death at times.
Yeah. So it's not about our comfort, and you used a couple of examples to make that point. The first one being the example of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, which is one of the best.
Yeah, I mean his life models this passage, in my opinion. Early on, Bonhoeffer was born into a family early 1900s Germany. He was born into a well-to-do family, and then most of his siblings went off to be lawyers, and they went into the medical field. And then here's Dietrich Bonhoeffer saying, I'm going to go give my life to the church. I'm going to be a pastor. And they made fun of him. And he went on anyway and became a pastor. He actually got his PhD. He was 21 years old, and he got his PhD. Isn't that incredible? And so ultimately, though, he came to the United States for a while. I didn't get into this in the sermon because I was trying to, be mindful of people's time. But
right.
Bonhoeffer actually went to the United States, studied at Union Theological Seminary in New York City, and it was there that he was exposed to, influenced by the Black church, African American church in America, and he was really challenged in terms of like their witness and their willingness to stand against the obvious racism and segregation of that time. And so when Bonhoeffer saw the way that they were being faithful in the midst of what they were experiencing here in the United States, and then he began to see what was happening in Germany with the rise of the Nazis, he decided that the Christian thing to do was to go back to Germany.
He didn't have to go back. He could have stayed in America.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah.
That's
true. Yeah.
And he went back and joined the resistance.
Yeah.
Led the
well, basically he started a seminary. I mean, he was training pastors on how to resist the Nazis.
Yeah.
And that's the context of his, it's a legendary book now, The Cost of Discipleships. That's the context. Right. He's calling out the church of that time in Germany, and their unwillingness to stand up against obvious things that were not Christ-like that the Nazis were doing. And so it's in that context that he uses the phrase cheap grace versus costly grace. And cheap grace is like faith without obedience. It's forgiveness without repentance, baptism without discipleship. It's like cheap grace is like saying, I want a relationship with God, but I'm really not interested in doing what it takes. I just want to be forgiven and loved, and that's it.
Yeah.
And costly grace, on the other hand, is I'm willing to do what it takes. And so Bonhoeffer was trying to call out to the church at that time. So, yeah.
Cost him his life.
It did. He died in 1945, I guess. I guess it was weeks before the Allies got to Germany.
Yeah.
It was such a tragedy because he had some concepts that I would love to hear. You know, what were you saying there?
Yeah, he had some unfinished writings.
Yeah, I mean, there was some. He was a brilliant theologian, and I would just be very curious to hear how he would have evolved post World War II. And
Still a young man.
Yeah. So,
and every form of Christianity loves him. You know, the liberals love him, the conservatives
they do.
love him. Yeah.
I know it. I mean, the thing I would say about Bonhoeffer, if I'm critiquing him, if we can critique him, I mean, it's hard because he gave his life, in my opinion, for the right thing.
Sure.
His writing can be utilized in such a way that it can become a form of works righteousness again. This idea that we're earning God's love, you know, through our obedience, we're earning God's love. We've got to be very careful with that.
Sure.
We're really responding to God's presence. And that's a very important distinction, in my opinion. So,
yeah. Maybe we'll come back and do a full podcast on
that one.
On Dietrich Bonhoeffer.
Yeah.
A lot of people know about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, but Phoebe Palmer is one that's not so well known.
Yeah, she comes from our Methodist tradition. Born 100 years earlier than Bonhoeffer, early 1800s. She was born into a Methodist home in New York City. And at that time, within Methodism, and just Christianity in general in America, there was this real emotionalism, kind of revivalism within the life of Christianity. And when Phoebe saw that, she kind of thought to herself, well, that's not how I am. I'm not emotional. I've never had an experience like that. So she felt like something was missing in her life. And finally, her turning point came because of grief, really. She had 6 children, and only 3 of them made it into adulthood. And one defining moment for her was when one of her babies, they actually died because an oil lamp fell into the crib and caused a fire. Just devastating stuff. Yeah. And she was like, what am I going to do with this grief? What am I going to do with this loss? She certainly wasn't feeling the types of emotions that people were claiming, you know, at the revivals. I mean, she was feeling emotion, obviously, with grief, but, you know, something was just off. And so basically her lifeline became a passage of Scripture, which is kind of obscure. It comes from Matthew 23. Jesus is going back and forth with the Pharisees. And in that context, he says, the altar sanctifies the gift. And so for Phoebe, what that meant was we don't wait for a feeling. Instead, we surrender ourselves to the fact of God's love. The altar sanctifies the gift. The altar for her is Christ. And so we offer ourselves fully and completely to Christ's love. And essentially, we get in the game. And we start living the obedient life, regardless of how we feel. And for her, it meant that she started a movement, a prayer group. It was a prayer group at first on Tuesday afternoons at her house. And this little prayer group became like a movement where a couple hundred people would show up every week. And they would confess what God was doing in their lives. And then another thing she did was in an era where women were not necessarily embraced, you know, in terms of preaching and stuff like that. She preached anyway. And then she opened up a kind of like a soup kitchen, shelter type of place in one of the poorest and one of the most impoverished areas of New York City. And so the thing I love about her is, you know, it was about a fact. It wasn't about a feeling. She got with it, and her life became an echo of God's love. And so, again, it's a little bit different than Bonhoeffer, but she did the difficult thing, right? I mean, that would have been very challenging to be a female preacher in those days, to host a prayer group and be a spiritual leader in those days, and then even to open that shelter in the 5 boroughs of New York City. That's incredible. And so that's one of the folks that people would not know about. People like me kind of remember those things, I guess. Yeah.
And is this where you brought in the threefold consecrate,
That's
believe,
her.
and testify?
Yeah, she had a threefold pattern, and not everyone agreed with her. I'm not even sure I completely agree with what she said. She said the language she used was if a person wants to be entirely sanctified, and that language goes back to John Wesley. And what entire sanctification is this concept that through God's presence, through God's grace and spirit, our hearts can be renewed or delivered from sin, and we can go from a sinful inner focus, a sinful selfish focus, to fulfilling Christ's command to fully love God and love neighbor. Now, I can't say I'm there yet, but it's the goal, right?
Yeah.
What Phoebe taught was that if that's what God desires of us, consecrate yourself to God, believe that that's possible for you, and go tell people that that's happened. I mean, that's what she said. And okay, I'm not sure, but I can't argue with her fruit either, And I love that she's a part of our tradition and the courage that it took to do what she did. And I think we would all be better off if we would do those things.
Yeah. And all of these things we've tried to incorporate into our mission and vision here at Methodist Temple.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously the question becomes, what's it look like for us then to be a disciple of Jesus in the 21st century in Evansville, Indiana? And our vision here at Methodist Temple has been for the last 7-8 years. We strive to be a safe and non-judgmental community where folks can connect, share, and explore what God is doing in our lives. The thing about that statement is and this is the thing I would want folks to understand. I said it in my sermon, I'll say it again. This is more than just marketing. This vision actually will cost something. Yeah. It's difficult because it starts with the idea that we welcome everybody. We seek to be a safe and non-judgmental community. Well, that means if we're really going to live into that, it's whosoever. People we like, people we don't like, people we agree with, people we don't agree with. And it starts there and then it continues. So that's the connect portion too. It continues with share. And we challenge people. Our goal here is to challenge people to serve and to do something about their faith. Don't just sit on the sidelines, do something. But it doesn't stop there. The ultimate goal is this idea of exploration of what God is doing in our lives. And what do we mean by that? Well, what gets started in our sharing really needs to be brought to completion. The goal of our faith is a full surrender, to use Phoebe's words, a full consent, a full giving over of everything we can to God's love, to God's presence. It's not just about our one-time service project, but it's really a life, kind of like a lifestyle change that the gospel calls us into. That's the story.
Many of us see that in our grandparents, and it was Grandparents' Day, so you tied that in. I know when I think about my grandparents, they were so formative for me. I have 7 grandchildren now. I hope I'm having that kind of influence on them. Yeah.
Well, the gospel is ultimately shared not necessarily through our words, but just who we are. And our grandparents embody the Spirit in the end. If you have a healthy relationship with your grandparents, I mean, they definitely, have a way of inspiring us to want to live into the faith. At least that's been my experience with my grandparents. I talk about them all the time. My grandmother went looking for me when I was on the run from the faith and on the run from my family, on the run from myself, really.
Right.
And she would leave notes on my car way back in the day, telling me I had a home. And then after I became a pastor and a Christian, one very meaningful moment that happened was my grandfather lived in Mooresville before he died. And I obviously live here in Evansville. He sent me a birthday card. It said, "Andrew, I miss you very much, but I would rather you be out serving Jesus than living across the street and be lost." And I'm like, that's a costly faith. It's a costly love. Yeah. And for me, it's just a reminder that Christianity is not about my comfort. It's if a person comes to church and they think, the first thing they think is, well, did I like the sermon? Or did I like the music? Or is there a program there for me? The truth of the matter is, if that's our motivation, then our comfort is at the center of why we're there. And that's not the story. The story of the gospel is the cross. The story of the gospel is, giving ourselves fully and completely over to the love we see in Jesus. And that's where our happiness is derived from. That's where our fulfillment is derived from.
Okay, that's the story that shaped us last week.
Right,
What's the story that's going to shape us this week?
I'll just really simply, if you see grace being manifested, or if you see grace being given to another and you start to grumble internally, then you've told yourself the wrong story. Mm-hmm. That's the wrong story.
Grace is not only amazing, it's irritating sometimes.
It can be quite irritating, yes. And that's certainly what happens in the Gospels. So,
all right.
Yeah.
Very good. All right. Thank you so much for listening, for watching our podcast. We appreciate it so much. Please know that if you don't have a church home and you're looking around for one, or a place where you can find belonging and challenge and following Jesus and following this discipleship path, we'd love to see you here at Methodist Temple. We worship at 8:30 in the morning. That's our traditional service on Sunday. And then 11, that's our contemporary service. You can also worship with us online. Whichever way you'd like to do that, we would really, really like it. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Pastor Podcast with Randy and Andy. We hope you'll join us next week. We see Christ in you.